Hello, fellow birders. My name is Denis Kania. Today we're going to be taking a close look at the 5 goose species that can show up in DuPage County. On the DuPage Birding Club Education channel, we'll be discussing all things bird related. As I mentioned, today we'll be looking at the geese that can be seen in DuPage County. So here are the geese that we might see. Of course, we're all familiar with the Canada Goose right here. That's the most common one, and we do see it year-round. But there is a very close resembling species called the Cackling Goose that we have to consider. We have 2 geese that are generally seen all white, like this one here, the Snow Goose and the Ross Goose. And those also come in another color morph, which is kind of a slate gray color, which we'll talk about in a minute. And then we have Greater White-fronted Goose, which is this one here in the center. So we can see right off the bat that we're going to have a couple comparison problems between Canada and Cackling and the Snow Goose and Ross's Goose. Here are charts that reflect all of the data that we've collected at Fermilab over the last 34 years, covering all 5 of the goose species. We can see right away that the Canada Goose is the one that we have year-round, and it has shown up on all of our surveys throughout the many years. You can see it's just completely year-round. The other birds all show up as migrants. You can see we have them starting out in January. There could be holdovers that hang around, but we should be seeing them in February and March migrating through. And then apparently at one point in time, we had a snow goose that kind of hung around for a while. But generally, we'd expect those to be in that early part of the spring departing. And you can see that's true for Ross's Goose as well as Greater White-fronted Goose and then Cackling Goose. All those are kind of in the same range of migration in the springtime. And in fall, we have them all coming back. Sometimes showing up in mid-September. Certainly by October, we have all of them represented, and they will remain through quite often showing up on Christmas counts at one point in time or another. You'll notice something a little different about Cackling Goose, and that is that you can see the early survey periods, we have no records for this species. And that's because this species was recognized in 2004. And prior to that, all of the geese that represent Cackling Goose now were considered a part of Canada geese. And we'll talk about that a little bit later as well. So let's take that look at the snow goose. And as I mentioned, they do come in 2 different color morphs. And so you can see here is what we call a blue goose. And so the body is more or less slate colored. And then we have this white head. It's the same appearance structurally as what we see in the white snow goose that we more typically see. And then on occasion, we'll see some geese that are snow geese that look like this. And this is an immature blue morph snow goose. You can see the bill is all dark. You can see it's rather dirty gray looking throughout. So the biggest clue probably would be who this goose is hanging around with. But I don't think we would have any other geese that would look quite like that. Ross's geese show up much more infrequently. And this particular plumage here, the blue morph of Ross's goose, is actually one of the rarest plumages that you can see in North America. So don't expect to come across that one very often. I've seen it only one time, and that was at Fermilab. So you can see a strong similarity here in plumage at least. But what we'll find as we look further is that Ross's goose is going to be a much smaller goose than the snow goose. And you can see that the neck is shorter and very stout looking, and the head ends up looking very rounded compared to the snow goose. Taking a closer look, again, here you can see a size comparison in this image. And so you can see Ross's goose is quite a bit smaller than the snow goose. Again, you see this very rounded head. It's a shorter, thicker neck. You can see this is a little longer neck here. And at this angle, this head appears to be fairly rounded, but it's not, you don't get the same effect that you get off of the Ross's goose. In looking even closer, you'll see that there's a difference in the bills. In the case of the snow goose, That's a little longer bill. And you can see that the edges of the bill, both the upper and lower mandible, have this little black line. And they say that it looks like the bird has black lips. So you can look for that. Ross's goose, on the other hand, is going to be very short billed. It looks very stubby billed. And that, I think, helps to accentuate the rounded head. Also, you can see that it's lacking or very finely showing, just a little bit of black here. So you would look for the absence of the black lips on the Ross's goose, in addition to the fact that it's very short billed. You'll also notice that on our Ross's goose, you'll see that there's kind of a scaly area or warty looking area that's kind of bluish in color right at the base of the bill, and that's diagnostic as well. Here's our Greater White-fronted Goose, which is quite unique compared to the other geese that we're talking about today. And some of the features that would make this goose stand out in the big flocks is the fact that it does have this white fronted area here just above the bill. So it's going to be kind of a white collar around the base of the bill. The bill itself is rather orange or pinkish in color, which will really stand out in the flock. And also the leg color is quite bright. So those two things would make this bird stand out in a field. And on the lower underparts of the Greater White-fronted Goose, we're going to see this very dark barring, and that's something that's even noticeable in flight. So you can watch for that. Very distinctive looking goose. So then we get down to the Canada Goose and Cackling Goose, and there is a real problem here as far as identification, because we're going to be basing a lot of it on the size comparison. You can see here a very large Canada Goose, and then you can see this very, very small looking Cackling Goose. And prior to 2004, when cackling geese were established as their own species, there were 16 races of Canada geese that were all considered to be Canada geese. And so out of those 16 races, there was quite a variation in size. And the non-migratory race, which is the one that we have here, was the largest of them. And then from that size all the way down to these smaller geese, there's a lot of variability. So you have these intermediate races that they're not as big as the Canada geese that we see here, and they're certainly larger than the cackling geese, but not by that much. At least some of those races are not that much small or not that much larger than what we see in the cackling goose. So that's where the problem comes in. Especially when we're doing something like a Christmas count and you're looking at a flock that might have several thousand geese in it, and you're trying to sort through and hopefully find some of those cackling geese so that you can check them off. And so you have to be very careful, because in those migrating Canada geese that are coming down, there will be some of these smaller races represented, and they are close in size to the cackling goose. So we have to be very, very careful. And we're looking for a couple of things. We're looking for a very, very short bill, much shorter than what we would see on any of our Canada geese. And of course, with luck, we end up them hanging around with some of the very larger Canada geese, and so that makes it quite obvious. There is a difference in this, vocalization of the two similar looking birds, with cackling geese sounding much higher pitched or squeaky sounding compared to our usual honking sound that we consider to be Canada geese. So you have to really pay attention to the short neck, very, very short bill, squat looking bird compared to what we have in that Canada Goose. So just for some size comparisons, even though we do have a lot of variability in the size of Canada geese, I'm showing some of these other geese in size comparison to Canada geese. And so here we have Ross's geese standing amongst Canada geese, and you can see that they do look quite small. On the other hand, snow goose is going to appear to be approaching the size of Canada geese. It is still smaller, but not by that much. Same thing goes for the Greater White-fronted Goose. You can see it's very similar in size. You can see how much it does stand out because those bright parts of the fleshy areas of this bird, the bill, and even those legs. Even though this is in like a grassy stubble area, those legs still show up, and those brighter areas or features actually help to identify this bird or pick it out of a large flock of other geese. So things to remember, those white geese require a very close look at the bill shape and the edges of the bill while looking for the presence of those black lips. And that head shape and the thickness of the neck are also important. Greater White-fronted Goose is rather unique with the bright colored bill and also the bright colored legs and then a barring on the belly. And the Canada Goose and Cackling Goose create quite a puzzle because we do have those intermediate sized Canada geese. But make note of the bill size and the thickness of the neck, and you should be okay on that. So thanks for taking the time to view this video. Hopefully we've given you some bird food for thought, and I hope you'll join us again in the future as we explore all things bird related.